So just to give you some background to Yatra, Yatra started back in 2006. It was started by three of us. We all used to work for a company called eBookers in the UK. Actually, initially when we went about pitching the idea of Yatra to investors, there were five of us. So out of the five, only actually two came back to India. The other three decided to drop off, and then we ended up getting one of the people from India to join us. So it was an initial journey from that three-member team. We have almost 2,000 people as of now. And it's been an interesting journey, right? It's had its ups and downs. We've been through the real highs of the business. So it started off in 2006, as I mentioned, grew on steroids all the way through 2012. Then Kingfisher collapsed, right? When Kingfisher went down, our business and industry went through a tremendous amount of change. And it took us 12 months to really come out of that depression. It's only in the last 12 months that growth is now strongly back in the business. But for a company like ours, that was a real challenge. You're used to growing and suddenly you're asking your people, hey buddy, stop growing, stop spending money. And now let's try and figure out how do we conserve cash, right? We had to lay off a large number of people. So we were at that point again, 1900 people, went down all the way to 1200 and then now have scaled up again to 2000. So it's been quite a challenging process. As part of that process, we've had to move some of the roles of our founding team members also. We've had to induct some new people, which brings with it its own set of challenges that we'll talk about. But I think on the whole, one of the things that we've realized as part of this process is that you have to be effective in terms of communicating with the partners. You have to be open and upfront, and you can't literally procrastinate the entire time, right? At some point you have to bell that cat and have that conversation with people as and when needed. I think that was definitely the hardest part in this journey, because one of the roles that you're playing as the CEO is also the guy who's selling the dream to the organization, right? Especially, before you have a strong brand, the first few people who join on the dream that you're proposing to them. And then obviously it keeps multiplying from there. So when that dream gets, shattered to a certain extent, I think it's a real challenge about going back to the same people who you've sold the dream to, maybe as recently as a few months before, and saying, hey, I'm sorry, but now this is what we need to do. It is definitely a very challenging period, but I've also realized that if you are honest with people, people will take you on face value. A lot of people that we laid off during that period, because I think the transition went so smoothly, we were very upfront with them. We also made sure we could help them find alternative jobs where possible, right? Gave them the due notice period and everything. A lot of them joined us back as things have improved. We didn't have to actually, pivot to a great extent among, if you were to look at a definition of pivot, going completely 180 from where you are, right? But what we've had to do is change focus once or twice. We went through this with Kingfisher. We were in such a, comfort zone till that point in time, till 2012. Every year you're growing literally 100%, right? Everything is, in place. You've got a rock solid brand out there. We never paid enough focus on hotels and packages. Every foreign investor that we would talk to would tell us, air margins will collapse at some point. Air will become a dog's business, right? But we never really, did anything about it. And then overnight, right, things changed. All the changes that we were thinking would happen over a period of 2 to 3 years ended up happening in 1 quarter. So during that 1 quarter, then Kingfisher went out, we lost virtually a third of our revenue, right? Not just on account of Kingfisher, but because the leverage moved from us to the suppliers, right? So there was near perfect matching of demand and supply, so the airlines didn't need to pay commission. They renegotiated all contracts. You had to refund millions of dollars to customers for forward booking that they had done on Kingfisher. So suddenly we went through this phase where something which was literally bread and butter for us, our core business, a large part of that evaporated. And then very quickly we had to really go about scaling up another part of the business to drive future growth. So that's the change that we had to go through. See, once you've got a large organization, it becomes very hard to change culture in a large organization. The kind of, I think, esprit de corps which was there in the initial, let's say 100, 200 people, is not there today from an organization standpoint in the 2,000 people, right? We've actually gone through the process where we first outsourced all our call centers. And we realized that when you were outsourcing, right, the guy who was in the outsourced contact center had no sense of brand ownership. in our business, the true brand ambassador is not Salman Khan, but the guy who's picking up the phone. Because whatever you might spend in terms of creating a brand impression, the minute he picks up the phone and answers the phone in a particular manner, right, that can make or break the brand. So we've taken all our call centers in-house. We are trying to, create that sense of ownership amongst the staff at that level that, listen, you are the true brand ambassadors of what we are doing. It's a very painful process now, much more challenging. And if I was to do it again, I would pay a lot more attention to this in the earlier phases than what we're having to pay right now. I think it's an interesting dilemma. And when you start off, you're hiring more on the basis of cost.
Yeah.
Right? Your budget, your thought process is, I want to spend 5 lakhs only on this job, so I take a person who's fitting into that budget. As you grow as an organization, you start focusing more on quality. Right? Then cost becomes less of a consideration, and you're thinking, am I raising the bar in terms of the person that I'm hiring? So over a period of time, you have this scenario where you have a team which is a mix and match of people. Right? You have what you could literally call, the old guard, and you've got the new folks who are coming into the organization. Assimilating both of these into the organization has been a challenge, right? It's, I think, more challenging in certain parts of the business, especially for things like technology, where you initially were hiring people who were coming from a very varied background, right? They were more, for lack of a better word, jugadu in nature, right? To hiring people who are more process-oriented, today coming with a strong educational background, good pedigree, good work experience. So creating all of these together into one team has been a challenge. And one of the learnings out of this, initially we were a bit slow to recognize this problem, and it led to a high degree of attrition. But what we realized over a period of time was that it was important to start forming cross-functional teams. Okay. As we had grown, I'll give you an example. We had an air vertical, which was the historical part of the business, which accounted for 90%. The new hires which were coming in and setting up new verticals. But when you needed to build cross-platform things, they would just not happen because the old team would not collaborate with the new team. So then over a period of time, we realized that it was important to start forming cross-functional teams. Focus more on the skills of the individual as opposed to the background that he or she came from, right? And then by assimilating them together into a common pool and having, teams which were formed of new and old as opposed to on a vertical, we were able to get people to start working together. But it was a painful learning experience and took us maybe the best part of 1.5 to 2 years to change that. Each individual is different. No two individuals are alike. So you will have to treat each individual circumstances on its merit. Our learning out of this was, it was an extremely challenging phase for someone like me. I came from a consulting background where you were used to working, with people who are equally motivated, if not more motivated than you. Right? Everyone was trying to outdo each other in terms of the merit of the work that they were doing. And out here you got into an environment where you suddenly had to worry about all the software issues, right? Am I hurting the emotions of a co-founder, right? Am I, making sure that he is given due respect in the organization as we are growing and realigning the roles? So it's been an interesting and challenging journey. I think fortunately, we've been able to put all of that behind us. As I mentioned, the rest of the founding team is also still very much together, taking on operating roles. And it's had, a challenging and interesting course. This was one of our learning, that make sure for your existing guys also, you have the option of skill enhancement programs. So have learning and development programs, right? Have career counseling for them so that they don't feel that they aren't being given the tools, okay, to compete with the new people that you're getting into the organization. It's very important to invest in that. We didn't do it early enough, and we faced a lot of backlash for that. But this is something we started doing maybe about 2.5 years ago, and it's worked really well for us. So we have a formalized learning and development program which is there, especially for technical skills. So for example, when you're talking about, engineering skills, you've got so many new platforms coming out today. You've got mobile as a really big thing. And the form factors that you're talking about are very different from, let's say, someone who was doing Java development 5 years ago. So we are doing these kind of training programs to make sure that people's skills are enhanced. I think as an organization, you can provide people a platform. If you're not providing the platform, then you as an organization are at fault. If you're providing the platform and people are still not showing the effort, then I think that it's the onus lies on them. But you have to provide the platform. In terms of direct competition, we haven't lost. And I think the smartest thing initially, both me and Deep, who's the founder of MakeMyTrip, did was have this conversation between us that we'll respect each other and our employees and not hire from each other. So I think that really paid huge dividends for us. And given that we guys are, literally 4 to 5 kilometers from each other, it would otherwise have been disastrous. So that paid off really well for us. We've off late now been losing to indirect competition, especially to a lot of the new e-commerce upstarts, because our tech folks are the folks who are in most demand. They walk in and come back with 2x of the salary that you're paying them, and this is becoming a daily phenomena right now. So you have at least one email from your HR saying, guy X has been offered 2x of what he was making out here. What do we do now? So I think that challenge is there, but the only way you can overcome that or circumvent it is by seeding through new people. So have a strong bench, make sure you've got a good hiring program in place, and you build redundancies within the organization. We've had investors who've had different thought process at different points in time. Because
somebody wants to be more aggressive, and somebody says, listen, conserve your cash, don't sort of,
right. Because I think that's also a reflection of where each of the investors is in their life cycle. Okay. Right? You have investors who come in at different points in the organization. Someone comes in, 9 years ago, or came in 9 years ago. Someone's come in more recently. The guy who's come in 9 years ago wants to see an exit. Right. A guy who's come in wants to see more aggressive investment happening. Right. So I think those kind of challenges definitely are there. One of the things that I've realized is that before you get into a board meeting, what I at least try and do is sound off the board members informally before the meeting. So make sure that you build consensus before you get into a board meeting. If you get to a board meeting where you don't have consensus on certain issues and then you get into a debate, I think that turns out to be disastrous. So a lot of pre-work actually is what is required before a board meeting. It's not just about those 4-6 hours. Yeah. It's about the pre-work that you're doing before that in terms of laying out this milestone. The other thing which is there is where investors want to do things differently and you want to do a different thing. I think over there, my one learning out of the first recession that happened back in maybe 2008-9 kind of a time frame was that we were not aggressive enough, and the investors wanted to conserve cash. I thought it was important for us to be aggressive in terms of customer acquisition because the industry was just growing at that point. But I was not, I think, forceful enough in terms of communicating the same to them. So I also feel it's important as the CEO, if you truly believe in something, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. Correct. If there is non-performance or if you lose market share, you're the one held accountable. So you need to be willing to have enough confidence in yourself to stand up and say, this is the right approach, right? And say, this is the milestone that I'm aiming for. Let's do this. Let's track it on these bases on a, let's say, quarterly, half-yearly, annual basis, whatever. But you should have the conviction to stand up there and stake a claim. My biggest role today is investor management. Right? So that, I think, is extremely important, especially in organizations like ours, which are going through a growth phase. Right? You're constantly, trying to raise capital. You're constantly pitching to investors, managing existing investors, talking to new set of investors. So that is definitely one of the largest parts of your time, right, which is going. The other part where I still, invest a significant amount of time and focus is on the product. Because ultimately that's what we are selling, right? There is a product which we are selling. If you don't focus on the product or the service that you're providing, there is no reason for you to exist. I don't now have to focus on finance. I don't have to worry about HR. I don't worry too much about marketing, right? But to me, these are the two core things where bulk of my time goes. And then it's also about playing agony aunt to people in the organization. So we have an open door policy and people just walk in, and especially in today's environment, everyone walks in saying, here is an offer letter I've got, now what should I do?